Oscar, sorry to see you here at this point. That must be a painful one to take. What happened?
Yeah, just dipped a wheel on the white line of the curb, and around I went. So silly mistake, really, or unfortunate mistake. So that's it.
Thank you, Oscar.
In just one corner, Oscar Piastri's sprint race and maybe his entire world title hopes were shattered. A sudden crash at turn 3 in Interlagos threw everything into chaos. What looked like a minor racing line tweak ended in disaster, as Piastri's McLaren lost grip on a water-soaked curb. Meanwhile, Norris capitalized and gained crucial championship points. Heading into Brazil, just 1 point separated the McLaren drivers in the title fight. After the crash, that gap exploded to 9. In a season this tight, it could be fatal. Piastri's emotional post-race comments reveal more than frustration. They reveal determination, insight, and a readiness to turn this painful moment into a comeback. The crash Oscar Piastri suffered at Interlagos wasn't born from recklessness. It came from the delicate, invisible margin that defines elite motorsport. To the untrained eye, it looked like a small driver error, a wheel too wide on the curb. But behind that split-second event was a series of interconnected problems that pushed Piastri toward the limit and then beyond it. First, the conditions. The circuit was declared dry, but turn 3 retained moisture deeper in the curbing from the previous night's rain. McLaren's engineers had already warned both drivers about surface inconsistencies, but there was no clear data pinpointing just how slick the outside edge was under full load at over 200 km/h. On his sprint lap, Piastri chose a wider line to maximize exit speed and reduce rear tire degradation. It was the right idea, but at the wrong moment. Second, the tire prep. McLaren had opted for an aggressive tire warm-up protocol, expecting quicker ramp-up on the medium compound. But the surface temperature on Piastri's set never fully reached the sweet spot. That meant less grip when it mattered most on the first few laps, when the pack was tightly bunched, and positions were won or lost within corners. Without full traction support, his car's rear became twitchy through turn 2, putting him slightly offline by the time he reached turn 3. Then came the moment itself. A subtle steering correction, one wheel onto a slightly painted curb still holding microscopic moisture, and that was enough. The rear rotated. Piastri instinctively countered, but the speed and angle made recovery impossible. His McLaren snapped left, and in a matter of tenths, the session was over. No points. No recovery. Just debris, dust, and disappointment. The bigger issue wasn't just the crash, it was the championship context. Heading into Brazil, Piastri was within 1 point of Norris. With the sprint offering up to 8 points, he had a real shot at leapfrogging his teammate. Instead, the incident handed Norris a clean run to third, and with it, 6 additional points. The gap now sits at 9. With just 4 race weekends remaining, that margin looms large, especially with one more sprint and limited race volatility expected in Qatar and Abu Dhabi. Oscar Piastri's performance in Brazil didn't fall apart because of a lack of control. It collapsed at the edge of engineering compromise. The McLaren MCL38, in its current form, is a car built for precision but also highly sensitive to external factors. Track temperature, tire warm-up curves, and load distribution all play massive roles in determining its behavior. And that's exactly what turned against Piastri in the sprint. McLaren engineers had gone into Saturday with a dual strategy: maintain competitiveness against Mercedes in the long runs, while giving both drivers peak traction on lap 1 to survive the early chaos. But those two goals clashed in practice. Piastri's car was set up slightly differently from Norris's, focused more on high-speed balance and less on low-speed rotation. It gave him more confidence through turns 6 and 7, but left him vulnerable if grip levels changed mid-corner, especially early in the race. Telemetry from FP2 and sprint quali showed that Piastri was pushing with near-perfect throttle modulation. His brake bias was adjusted toward the rear, which helped rotation but increased the risk under sudden load changes. In turn 2, that worked. But in turn 3, with the car slightly unbalanced and the curb holding just enough residual dampness, the margin vanished. There wasn't enough lateral support to recover from the shift. What's more impressive and less talked about is how calculated Piastri's approach had been all weekend. He worked with his engineers to optimize tire prep lap by lap. He adjusted his gear selection manually in several corners during sprint qualifying to reduce diff locking. These are things only top-tier drivers do, especially rookies in their second season. He was building a lap that would have kept him ahead of Norris, or at worst, within reach for a fight in the Grand Prix. McLaren themselves admitted in internal debriefs that the conditions shifted beneath them and Piastri was the one who paid the price. Norris benefited from a slightly more conservative traction map and was 2/10 slower through Sector 1 in race trim. But he finished. That's the brutal difference in elite motorsport. You can be the sharper driver, the better planner, and still be undone by a single engineering variable nobody sees until it's too late. The crash wasn't a mistake in judgment. It was a failure in margins, a fraction of throttle, a few degrees of surface moisture, a half click of brake bias. And the way Piastri extracted so much out of an unstable car until that moment only further proves what kind of talent McLaren is dealing with. A future world champion who's not just fast, but technically gifted, the kind of driver who doesn't fold under pressure, but learns from it. Oscar Piastri came into the Brazilian Grand Prix sprint knowing exactly what was at stake. He had clawed his way to within a single point of teammate Lando Norris in the championship standings, a position that only sharpened the pressure. Every lap counted. Every sector could tilt the balance. Piastri didn't approach the weekend with caution. He came to fight. That hunger was written across every push lap he logged on Friday. He was sharp, aggressive, and calm under fire. That's what made what happened next so cruel. The conditions on Saturday were volatile, typical Interlagos. The track was dry but still treacherous from overnight moisture. Grip levels fluctuated unpredictably from one turn to the next. And yet, Piastri was running clean. Until turn 3. A slight deviation from the ideal line, no more than a few centimeters, led him to a curb that looked dry but wasn't. In that moment, the rear of the McLaren snapped. There was no recovery. The car rotated violently and collided with the barrier. It was a brutal reminder of how thin the line is at the highest level of Formula One. Piastri climbed out unhurt physically. But inside, the cost was obvious. This wasn't just a DNF. This was a championship blow. While he watched from the garage, Norris capitalized. He stayed on track, collected sprint points, and built a 9-point gap in the standings. What had been a neck-and-neck fight was now tilted toward the Briton. Piastri didn't just lose time. He lost margin. And with only 4 races left, that difference could be decisive. In the aftermath, Piastri's reaction was not rage, not excuses, but reflection. His statement to media was short, but powerful. He acknowledged the risk, the unpredictability, and above all, the fine margins that define elite motorsport. He didn't blame the team. He didn't hide behind telemetry. He simply owned it. He showed the kind of maturity that marks future champions, a willingness to analyze, adapt, and move forward, even when the setback stings. What fans didn't see was how quickly he returned to work. Inside the McLaren garage, Piastri was already debriefing with engineers, reviewing data, and mapping out changes for the Grand Prix. That's who Oscar Piastri is. Not just a driver with natural speed, but a competitor wired for improvement. Brazil wasn't the end, it was a pivot. One that could shape how he finishes the season, and how McLaren sees his long-term role as a title contender. The immediate consequence of Oscar Piastri's crash in Brazil was obvious: 0 points from the sprint, and a lost opportunity in one of the most critical weekends of the season. But the long-term impact? That's where this story takes a deeper turn. Because what happened at Interlagos didn't just shift numbers on a standings board, it may have quietly reshaped McLaren's internal balance heading into the final phase of 2025. Heading into Brazil, the fight between Piastri and Norris was closer than ever, separated by just 1 point. Within McLaren, that battle has been watched carefully. While Norris remains the established face of the team, Piastri's rise this season has forced difficult conversations about future leadership. He's been consistent. He's outqualified Norris on multiple weekends. And until Brazil, he was building momentum at the perfect time. The crash doesn't erase that, but it delays the statement he was ready to make. Now the gap is 9 points. With 4 races to go, including another sprint in Qatar that's still recoverable. But it narrows the margin for risk. Piastri can no longer afford another non-finish or set-up compromise. Every lap now becomes a calculated mission. And that brings pressure not only on him, but on McLaren's engineering staff. They know one more misjudgment, one more exposed weakness in race trim, and the rising star could slip out of reach in the team standings. What's critical to note is how Piastri responded to the setback. He didn't point fingers. He didn't shut down. Internally, sources say he was back in the sim briefing room just hours after the incident. He understands that the path to a championship isn't linear, and that resilience matters just as much as raw pace. If anything, the crash has hardened his focus. He's still in the fight. And he knows that to beat Norris, it will take more than speed, it will take maturity, strategy, and a ruthless ability to bounce back. And here's the forecast that matters most: McLaren sees it. They've seen how he absorbs data, how he communicates with the team, and how he processes pressure. He may have lost points in Brazil, but he gained respect from fans, from his engineers, and from the paddock. And as the 2025 season draws to a close, one thing is becoming increasingly clear: Oscar Piastri isn't chasing Norris anymore. He's chasing his own ceiling. And it's higher than most people realize.